Welcome to MidLIFE Matters, where we celebrate women's wisdom and wit. I'm Georgian Lussier, your host, and I'm delighted to introduce today's guest, Anna Gopoian, the founder and executive director of TriCircle, Inc., and she's here to share a fascinating story of her role in the community and the many good works that they're engaged in. So welcome, Anna.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
And you envision this organization as a way to provide education and community engagement regarding addictions.
Yes.
Okay. And you're now in your fourth year. It's a nonprofit, phase one, big plans. And where are you currently?
Well, phase one, always looking at phase three, and in the middle of that would be phase two. So as phase one is, and where we're at now with that in the community, we have hope and support groups. And we also have Hope After Loss groups. And those are specifically for parents, guardians, and loved ones that have someone in their life affected or have lost someone in their life due to a substance use disorder. So, and when phase one is in its full implementation, we will also have a wellness center, which has a 30-day calendar. We'll be able to provide resources on multiple pathways of recovery and trainings and education and integrate what will soon be opening in the beginning of 2020, which is an outpatient program. So we're really excited about that as well.
So tell me a little bit about the support groups, how they started and where they meet.
Well, right now in Wallingford, we have one on the first Sunday of every month, soon to be 2 Sundays of each month. And it's in the morning on Sunday, and it's in Stop and Shop. So we say, come and get a meeting, get some support, and do your grocery shopping. So it's kind of a win-win situation.
Yeah.
And that is an hour and a half long. All of our meetings are co-facilitated. One person is a licensed professional, and one person is like myself, a paraprofessional with lived experience with substance use disorders and mental health, and also educated in those two fields.
Okay. And you said one is for people that are currently dealing with someone, a loved one, who's in some phase of addiction, and one is for someone who's lost.
When you say engage with an active substance use disorder, maybe they're missing. Maybe they're in Department of Corrections, the DOC system, or they're in treatment, or they're thriving in life without the use of drugs. So we want to make sure that the hope is kept alive, and through our experiences and knowing who you're talking to. So really paring back the reality of the disease and what's going on and the purposes and reasons behind it. So that's what's really great about having a paraprofessional there as well, so we can kind of pare back what's really being said. I know what you're hearing, but what's really being said.
And the people who have lost someone?
Well, I look at the disease of addiction in its entirety. So a lot of folks, and incredibly important, just as much so as giving the attention needed by someone that has lost. So recovery, treatment, and prevention, incredibly important. But for the folks that have lost someone, that would complete the circle. Those people are affected. And the stigma and isolation that surrounds the disease is just as detrimental as the disease. And that stigma and isolation through the active addiction is one very challenging layer. But when someone passes it, it's a whole nother layer. So we bring together the resources, and then we're able to talk about people that have passed. So they're really not gone. We build them into the solutions, and then it's a way to, navigate the solutions and have those folks be part of it. So it's really a win-win outcome.
And what does TriCircle reference? What are the 3 circles?
Well, it's 3 phases and 3 cycles in the 3rd phase. Okay. So I love numbers. And 3s, it has a lot to do with the intention and moving forward and cyclically coming back around. So there's always that win-win outcome and the giving back and the solutions for, when you learn something, if you share it, it becomes of more value. So going forward. So the 3rd phase of the whole organization's intention is to have a 15-month residential program in 3 5-month cycles. A lot of what we know is that the drugs aren't the problem. They're the solution to a much older problem. And we need a longer period of time to really be able to disseminate the story before the story. What created the circumstance that the relief was necessary, which and sometimes starts out as a behavior, not even a substance, or a substance then a behavior. So treating the whole disease and a whole person.
And what do you, so talk a little more, it's intriguing in terms of what your plans are and how that's a enormous undertaking.
It
I mean,
is.
you just are tackling a huge issue of a national proportion, international, I'm sure, but we'll stay national for right now.
Right. Yep.
And so what are some of the next steps? Who's helping you? Who's on your board, your other supporters?
All great questions. And I understand it's a huge, situation, a huge dream, a huge vision, and a really encapsulated purpose that gives me a reason to get out of bed. Because I had lost my purpose for a very long time. And as a woman, I'm 56 years old. And going forward, laid off in an organization after 26 and a half great years with the company. I'm, got into school and throughout that process as well. But going forward and taking into consideration the status as a nonprofit organization, I see that as a privilege. And I really hold the level of transparency, accountability, and integrity to my heart. And I am held to all those principles by a board of directors, which we have the potential of 9 bodies. Right now it's 7, and they've cycled through different terms already because we're in our 4th year as of now. And 5 of those members have actually lost children. And the other folks, one is a young female, Emily Abrahamian. She is a woman in long-term recovery, and she is really part of the demographic we want to serve in our 3rd phase. So I thought it to be imperative to really have representation of that body with lived experience on our board to help guide us in making sure that we're hitting all the high marks. And then another one of the people on our board has a loved one that's in recovery. So we really take that all into consideration. And we believe in referenced more than once in what we do, what we say, and where we do it is together we are stronger. So it's bringing all the people to the table, which everyone knows someone.
Yes. And what about the clinical support? Where do you get that from, and what are your thoughts going forward?
We have a clinical advisory board that also meets once a month. The board of directors meets once a month, 3 hours, and the clinical advisory board meets once a month for 2 hours. Sometimes more is needed, and they show up. They absolutely do. So where we are in clinical, just got the word today that we were our first contract for Medicaid, all 5 contracts. So every licensure needs its own contract. TriCircle Incorporation is the one that got the contract, and actually those 5 are credentialed, I should say. So the NPI number is through TriCircle. So we'll be able to be the provider, and then we're subcontracting the licensed folks for our outpatient program. And we want to make sure that we have enough to offer, but we also don't want to stuff a group and make it about money. So we're really, really hyper concerned of doing things differently. And, of course we need money to go forward. It's a nonprofit organization, but if it becomes about the money, and then we're skewed from the main purpose. And we just want to make sure that the resources are available. And we just had our 3rd annual meeting. So that really shared the outline of where we're at. And this year, there's already been a cycle of $91,000 up to date, and when that was October 31st. So where we get our funds is very diverse, and the engagement with other organizations is super important as well. So
that's enormous, I would think, to be accepted by Medicare.
It's the start.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. And it's not just me.
No, I understand, but I mean, okay, congratulations to TriCircle.
Yes, and it can't be just about me.
Right.
I know my place. I know what I do know, and I know what I need to learn. And I know, and I'm learning to get better with delegating and really trusting the process that these people are on my path serving the same purpose, and that I have to allow them to do that. And, if we don't succeed with a true intention, we're being guided in a different direction. That's all. It doesn't have to be horrible. It can just be a learning process. I said earlier, I think when we were talking about the beautiful thing about learning is you can't get worse.
Right.
So we already know what doesn't work, and how do we bring forth the change that's necessary so people can, I hope to get fired one day. How's that sound?
There you go. That's great.
That's a great goal, right?
Yeah.
It's like my services would no longer be needed.
Right. And you touched briefly before, but I'd like to explore a little bit more about the stigma of addiction, mental illness, and what are some of the barriers to shifting people's mindsets?
Well, for one, there's hope. That it doesn't matter where you come from. I'm a big fan of Wallingford, grew up in the Yalesville part of Wallingford on the west side. And, there's what is appeared in a family, in a neighborhood, in a town, and Stigma is a tough thing when it comes to the disease of addiction too, because it's always somebody else's family until it's your own. And then we have to personally take on our part in the judgment, right? So until I can become part of the solution, I had to recognize my part of the problem. So then I can go forward and make a difference and really kind of like level the playing field. So the stigma and isolation that I say is just as detrimental as the disease itself, because the secret is where the negativity and the disease itself grows, and the more people it takes down. It's a family disease, so there's one person that might be affected. It could be of a lineage, and it's that secret that continues going forward, that there's no shift and change. But when one person speaks, and a lot of the times I get very vulnerable in the groups or on one-on-one conversations, and it's almost giving permission to other people, like it's okay. It's okay, because everybody does know someone. So the stigma, it's kind of like a spiteful way to get back at the disease. It's like, when I live well, that's the best get back at the disease itself. So I'm going forward, and I'm going to thrive in life, and I'm going to let other people know that that's possible too.
It can be seen as a moral failing.
Absolutely.
Correct,
Absolutely.
right? That it's a weakness, a lack of determination. Do people really want to help themselves? I would imagine in Guideposts, which is a Christian collection of stories, this month has something about addiction and how many times people tend to cycle through rehab programs and the recovery and slide back, or maybe that's not the right term, but just retreat and, lose ground, whatever the correct term is. And what does your research tell you as an organization in terms of, you've got these ideas of how many treatment cycles, whatever. What is research saying today about recovery and setbacks?
Well, I take the numbers into consideration, but what I also see is what social media does to sensationalize a problem and to sell newspapers and articles and TV time.
Okay.
What you're not saying is like how many people are surviving, how many people are thriving, how many people are living without the use of drugs. So I have been given a great opportunity to, in our town, in our state, in our country, and internationally, be with thousands and thousands of people that are living well. And that's only from one organization when there's multiple pathways.
Right.
So I can feed that if that's what you want. Some of those numbers are true. And it's the only information someone might know is what they're seeing on TV. And that really concerns me. And I want to make sure, even in our hope and support groups, that we share about the realities and the numbers and things like that. I personally, July 13th, 1995 is the day I found recovery, and I stayed in recovery. So, and I know I'm not alone with not relapsing or not lapsing. And there's differences in language from a lapse to a relapse.
I imagine there is.
Right.
Yeah.
How many detoxes? Well, when you're trying to remove a substance from your body and you're in detox for 3 days, you're not detoxed.
Right.
And if you're not aware of the other symptoms that might present themselves and the discomfort, you're going to want to remove that.
Right.
And if you're going back into an environment that's not conducive to wellness, it's basically a setup. Yeah. We hope to break that level of recidivism so that the cycle doesn't have to continue.
Right. I had learned one time, and maybe it was one school of thought, say with alcoholism, it can take 90 days for like the fog or whatever you would want to use as an analogy in your brain to enable a healthier brain around judgment and impulse control. And that was astounding to me, but it makes sense. Again, think of if people are losing weight or any major behavioral change that they have, things don't happen overnight. And I would imagine as family members and people who really care about those they're connected with, it can be, I imagine, discouraging if it's not a linear path, right?
Yeah, absolutely. But it needs to be written linearly so we can read it and we can start to ingest. But what a great way to express the 90-day fog lift. And that's all that is.
Yeah.
Because then what you're presented with is life on life's terms without what you've relied on, what's worked for you.
Right.
And it's aggravating in a way when people say, oh, you only have one thing to change and that's everything.
It's everything.
That's not funny. This
No,
particular
that's not
person
funny.
addressed me and thought that was quite funny. And I'm like, And I went forward on that just to show them, right? I did show them. I was able to go back and speak for the facility a year later with my recovery time, and able to say that in that 1 year time, I was able to do more than the 32 years before it. So I was grateful for that. But that fog being lifted is not even the beginning stage. Putting the substance down is really the beginning. The 90 days, if you can even have an environment conducive to, to have that fog lifted, that's great. But the healing process itself within the brain is going to take at least a year.
I'm sure.
And then the tools. You have to collect the tools.
Right. And think of people who have a physical issue, a stroke, a serious accident, how long it can take to regain where they're going to be at their optimum for whatever constraints they might be left with.
Absolutely.
Right. And how much that requires everyone in the family to shift, perhaps. It's going to be there when the person first maybe gets out of physical rehab.
Yeah.
Same thing with drugs, alcohol, mental issues. It's all connected.
Well, take into consideration diabetes or cancer.
Yeah.
Why is one disease given so much compassion and love and community, and the other one is so discriminated against? Yes, the family is affected, but no different than any other disease.
Right.
Bringing that is sometimes easier to digest and really, but when you're being maybe robbed, but we hurt the people we love the most. And their easiest target, right? And you're pulling on heartstrings, and people are taxed over time.
Right.
So
fatigued, I imagine,
absolutely.
Right? Emotional support fatigue.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And that's what the groups is able to work on. Okay. The intention of the group is the self-care of the loved one. That's the true intention. Because when you're well, meaning a parent, guardian, or loved one, and then your loved one makes a decision to do something different, you'll have something to offer. But if you're dancing with the same disease, then there's really not much left of you either.
Nothing in the well, so to speak.
Yeah. So the self-care and really the camaraderie and the peer support is amazing. The best groups run themselves, actually.
I would imagine.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. But it's uncomfortable. It's,
sure.
Everybody that's there, though, has had their first day. And that's what they try to really let the other person know, is that it's okay to be here. A matter of fact, it's quite commendable.
Oh, I imagine it takes a lot of courage and resolve.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Determination.
But it just makes a big difference. It's really, really important. And they become the best advocates.
Oh, sure. Absolutely.
For their friends, maybe other family members,
They might get the calls.
You never know what
Looking
happens.
for advice.
Yeah, and we stay available, on a regular basis, and it's a daily basis in some circumstances.
Sure.
Yeah, it's very scary.
Yeah. Well, let's shift a little bit to your story. You started college in MidLIFE.
I did.
Right. And you talked about you had worked somewhere for over 25 years. And how did you prepare for yourself to tackle higher education coursework?
Well, I'll say I loved my job, for one. So that was Blue Cross and Blue Shield when I was in North Haven and now in Wallingford. And I was acquisitioned 3 times. So by the time the final layoff for me came, it was 26 and a half years later. But in that process, I knew I was being given the opportunity. But what I needed to do is learn how to read better.
Okay.
And that was part of another stigma, right? It's like, I can't tell anybody.
Right.
Like, I had gotten through my whole life, bopping and weaving. And, I was able to push people away, allow them close enough, but push them away so they wouldn't find out a lot of secrets that were going on. So not knowing how to read better, I utilized the comic strip section of the newspaper.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so it was, in recovery at the age of 32, I worked for this organization. So I went to treatment, and I was able to, from that point forward, start obtaining dreams and inspiring to learn to read better, for one. And at the age of 42, signed up to go to college.
Wonderful.
Which I think I was 3.5 feet tall on the first day because I was so terrified to fail. And I had an old noise in my head that I would probably fail and that I didn't even deserve this. If you got what you deserved, you wouldn't be here. So it's really pressing through some of that negative self-talk and, was the first person in our whole class that made honor roll dean's list. And I wasn't even unaware. I wouldn't have checked. They told me.
Nice.
So yeah, I didn't stay there because once I knew I wanted to stay there, it's just a defeating, but a bachelor's in social science. And then I continued forward. I have 5 different certifications, all pertaining to the field. And then I started a second pathway, which is another associate's in drug and alcohol counseling, and then a certificate in substance use counseling. So I'll get licensed when it is in the best interest of the organization. All the licensed people are around me, and everything is listed on our website. Paraprofessionals, board of directors, everything we do is online. So I'm really proud of that as well, because it really supports our transparency. So going forward in my education, I'm not done. I feel like I'm just getting started.
Sure.
But the big goal in that third phase was far larger. In, for me to be involved, it had to be broken into the 3 phases for us to be successful. And each increment is where we'll build the integrity and capital to go forward. So it's really, really important that I will continue learning. It's inevitable. That's life in general. Sure. Change inevitable.
Yes.
So I'm just going to keep moving. And I call the old football. I was the only girl that played football in the neighborhood. Okay. I learned tuck and roll a long time ago. Okay. So life on life's terms is going to happen.
And where did you get your support from? So you take on this enormous challenge of having, if you were reading the comic books, you really had quite a way to go, or the strips.
Yeah.
No,
absolutely.
That's fascinating just to be able to then work with, much more sophisticated information and requirements. What would you attribute your ability to do that to?
I think it was my community in my recovery that did a lot of that, and I aspired to be like certain people.
Okay, so you had role models?
I did, and they're not where you might think they would come from. So I have a lot to offer, and I believe that now, where there was many years I didn't. Okay. So I just kind of show up, and people are presented, and try not to judge, and realize they're there for a reason, right? So now I can walk into a room and see similarities versus differences. Okay. So versus segregate myself, I incorporate myself. Nice. And sometimes there are very small increments, just to open the conversation to realize that that person is pretty much many similarities as myself.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Never know.
And what community groups are you involved with?
I'm excited about this part. Many, and that's changed too over time. So my latest endeavor is working with and volunteering for my spot in what will hopefully be a vote for the Wallingford Community Women. Okay. So I've been was able to do the food bank, do some volunteer time there, a few hours, writing letters for soldiers, and then recently at Sheehan High School with the craft fair. And that was great. So I'm looking forward to, and I know so many of the people, which is great because it's like I'm re-emerging.
Yes.
There's what you think.
Right.
There's like what you know, what I know, and what I think you know. Okay. Right? So this is what people thought of me because that's what I allowed them to see or what they saw. Right. And now I'm representing myself as part of the solution. So it's kind of win-win. Yeah. So that's only one of them. Okay. We, as an organization, have given over 1,100 pounds to donations to Masters Manna. Started conversations with SCOW and looking forward to bringing resources for Hope and Support and Hope After Loss to the Spanish community. Yes. Because it's very necessary. And culturally, there's a lot of differences when addressing mental health and substance use disorders.
Oh, I would think.
Yeah. Yeah. And I had to learn that. You know what I mean? I am not of the descent, and I don't know all of the culture, so I learned what I could learn, and then I leave it to folks that have that in their background, in their story, and the licensure and understanding to best serve. Okay. Because then, that's what I want to do. I want to provide the resources, and the tools to build strong futures. That's part of our tagline. And I had written down not only Masters Manna, Gaylord Hospital, we've been able to utilize their services, meaning the properties as a nonprofit for our symposiums and trainings, and so grateful. And Center Street Luncheonette, big fans. We have a monthly setback tournaments down there, so it's another thing where we're able to come together. And first of all, Amy makes us a $10 menu, and that opens the dialogue. There's 2 hours for us to sit down, play cards, or maybe have a conversation that we couldn't have had the last time we crossed paths. Yeah. But then come 7 p.m., the game starts. Yeah. And it's a lot of fun.
That's great.
Yeah.
So you don't have a physical building at this point. You're working out of a variety of community settings and...
Well, actually, we have an office. Okay. We have 12 meetings in 6 towns now, and that's including 8 for Hope and Support, and 4 now was our recent funding that we got for 4 more meetings in Enfield. So 8 of the Hope and Support and 4 of the Hope After Loss. But our office we got in Middlefield, which is still considered part of the Central Connecticut community and different chambers. So we're still engaged, you know. Wonderful. So I want to make sure, you know, in other chambers of commerce that we get involved with over time, because everything is money and you have to make sure you're able to take advantage of the resources that are being provided. So absolutely. Yeah. And alcohol and drug policy for the state of Connecticut, I'm on one of their subcommittees for recovery and wellness, is in hopefully going to be working in this town to make Wallingford a recovery friendly community. So we're able to put things in the, you know, this conversation needs to be open. Hopefully this will be a platform to do that. And then from the town website, we're able to actually have links to the resources within our community that are already there that people don't even know about.
Sure. Sure. I'm sure many people, when they do get to that first point where they're like, we have, you know, something we all need to deal with, where to start, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. What are the resources? And okay. Now, you talked about having a long history in Wallingford, your family, and what do you value most about your heritage and growing up in Wallingford?
Wow. I mean, I give all of the amazing parts of me attribute that to my grandparents, right? So my grandparents, incredibly different as people, culturally, socially, but amazing. So the Yankee Silversmith my grandfather was the founder of that. And just having that platform of a worldwide reputable restaurant and everything that it brought to the table. I mean, our groceries came out of the restaurant, you know, but to be a little kid and to walk around and read the guest book from all the different towns and states and countries that would come, and the food, but what happens over food is amazing. And then when the Polar car came off the tracks in Meriden and was attached and it's just history. It's very sad that it's not there anymore due to circumstances. But the other side of the family, being my dad's side, culturally was Armenian. And my grandfather was a genocide survivor of the Turkish-Armenian genocide. And then my grandma and him really built something amazing. They had the chicken coops, so they had a chicken farm, and they had a trailer park, and they had apartments and honeybees and gladiolas, and if the milk spoiled, you made cottage cheese. Nothing got wasted. Clothes got made. My dad is first generation, and you know, when they came together and played pinochle or whatever that was amazing. It's so rich. What I feel so fortunate to have had my upbringing guided by their support, you know.
And what advice would you give your younger self?
I loved that question. I loved it. You know, I think you referred when we were first talking about the age of 25 and then 40. And 25, I was really in the midst of my disease. And I had really survived episodes of a lifetime prior. So I would really stop trying. I don't want to say stop trying, maybe that's too hard, to please other people, but really to maybe become more honest with myself and look at what I did and why I did it. You know, maybe said, I don't know how to read sooner. Had the courage to have stood up and to be unique, but very much a part of the greater good. You know, I just didn't know how to be me, and I don't, you know, I did what got me attention, that's for sure. And it might not have been the right thing, but it's what I knew to do. So I would say speak up and be proud of the accomplishments and know that there's always room for change.
That's a beautiful way for us to end our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Best of luck with all your endeavors.
Thank you.
And please tune in to hear other fascinating women on future segments of MidLife Matters. Georgian Lussier, your host, and thanks so much for joining us.